This podcast encourages and empowers you to create your own unique real story, develop your own unique real statement, and discover your own unique real self. The power is yours. Good night, Rob Brus. How are you doing on this wonderful, beautiful night?
G'day, Angelo. Really well, mate. How about yourself?
I'm excellent, my friend. What part of the world are you in? I mean, with that accent, it's challenging to wonder, right?
It's pretty easy. I'm from a beautiful place in Sydney, Australia, called Cronulla. It's right on the beach in the southern suburbs of Sydney. I'm about, maybe about 30 metres from the water. It's absolutely stunning.
Oh, my gosh. Wow. Yeah, one friend today told me it's better than the Caribbean. I said, no way. I'll have to come see that and make sure about that.
I don't know. Maybe I can go to the Caribbean and find that out myself, but it sounds like it.
Well, Rob, do tell me, which of your talents is responsible for us connecting at this specific time in history?
Seems like the podcasting talent. Like you, I'm also a podcaster. I have a show called Go All In. I've got approaching 100 episodes, and I'm also the host of another podcast called Australian Aviation, which is Australian Aviation is the biggest aviation publication in the Southern Hemisphere. We have about 1 million hits up against our website every month, and I love talking about airplanes and helicopters and podcasting and doing all things broadcasting. Actually, I love that.
Wow, that's amazing. So, all right, you're doing two huge things, right? Which one came first, the aviation or the other podcast?
I think I'd have to say that the aviation stuff came first. You know, that was in my childhood. My dad worked for an airline here in Australia, and my love of aeroplanes started very early. I think I was looking at some pictures earlier today when I was a little kid, and I think it must have been about 4 years old, and there's a picture of a Concorde in my bedroom, and I've always had a love of aviation. But in the podcasting world, my show Go All In, that was before the aviation one, but you know they're pretty close actually. Not much of a difference, only about 6 months apart.
Intriguing. So, what inspired you to start the podcast?
You know, that's a good story. Like a lot of people, I wanted to write a book, but if you've ever been challenged enough to try and write a book, it's a very, very hard thing to do. And as I sat down and began writing, I must have been about 100 pages in, I realised that writing a book wasn't what I wanted to do. I actually wanted to share my message, and I felt like I was pretty opinionated by many different things. And I guess opinion is probably not the right word, but I wanted to share my message with the world and communicate my view of the world with people. And I figured that a really good way of doing that would be to share other people's stories. And when I share other people's stories, then I guess I can weave my view of that in there, my experience and my opinions in there as well. And I'm endlessly surprised and amazed, and I'm really fascinated with the mindset of going all in on something. And when somebody makes a decision that's really exciting in their life to go all in on something, I'm fascinated about how people go about that and what they do to stick at it and see it through to success. So they're the stories that I love to tell, and I guess that's where I love to interject my opinions and my thoughts. And it was, you know what, in the end, it was a whole lot easier than writing a book, that's for sure.
Yeah, I can well imagine. Yeah, I haven't heard anyone that says, yeah, I love writing books. They're so easy to do. I haven't heard that says, yeah. I think your earbuds is brushing up against you when you're speaking.
Sorry, mate.
Yeah, you're okay. So tell me about the afterburner concept, please, because it's sounding as though what you're speaking about comes from that afterburner imagery in my mind. Tell me a bit more about that, please.
Yeah, it does. So Afterburners, I'm one of the senior executive partners for Afterburner here in Australia, and we're a coaching and a training business, and my business partner, Christian Vicoussis, he's an ex-F-18 fighter pilot. He was a fighter pilot for a long time in the Royal Australian Air Force, and then he did an exchange with the Royal Air Force as well, and he flew Tornado bombers over there at the same time. And wow. You know, when he was kind of ejected, excuse the pun, but he was ejected from the military after being diagnosed with a disease that stopped him from flying. So he was kind of medically canned from flying. And he was offered a job to fly the Prime Minister around in the private jets and the business jets that the Air Force has, but he decided he was going to make a clean break from the Air Force. And as a young guy, he never really knew anything else except the way the RAF had taught him to do things. And they use a process called Flex, or flawless execution. And it's people don't go out to a fighter jet, get in the thing and go, I think we might be going that away and we're going to drop a bomb on that target, I think. They plan absolutely everything. And the Flex methodology is the foundation and the basis of the Afterburner business. And we use Flex to help businesses, companies, and brands execute and achieve a 98% mission success rate. And I love everything to do with Flex. I love everything to do with aviation, of course. And my background is not Air Force. I was in the Royal Australian Navy and the Australian Army. I was in 2 services, and I spent 9 years in the Australian Defence Force and deployed on operations several times, and met Christian later in life. And, we got together and did the Afterburner thing together, and that's a really super successful business here in Australia. It's about coaching, it's about keynotes, it's about helping companies achieve that 98% mission success rate, and we're proud of the record that we have, and we love to deliver that message.
That's beautiful. Love it. Where's the best place for people to connect with you that are listening?
Well, you can go to afterburner.com.au and find out more information right there.
Now, where did you get the ability to process as fast as you do? Who did you get that from?
I think that's the military thing. And my very last posting in the Australian Defence Force was at the Australian Army Parachute School. And I ended up getting to do all the Special Forces parachuting without having to go through all of the heartache and the pain that those SF guys go through. And, I think I ended up with about 300 jumps under my belt by the end of that school. I had about 70 or 80 static line jumps, and the rest of them were free fall, daytime, nighttime. And, it's just repetition, training, repetition, practice. And when you put it in an environment like that where you're responsible for your life, and you're consistently responsible for your own life, and then as you get a little bit more senior and you have a bit more responsibility, you start to become in charge of other people, and then you're responsible for them. That helps you to think on your feet. That forces you to be quick thinking and to be confident in your ability to deliver. And, it's practice. I do a lot of podcasting as well, which helps. I get asked a lot of the same questions all the time as well. So I'm pretty good at articulating my message because it's well practiced. But that practice is not something that I take lightly. It's something that's taken years and years to refine, and it's become a skill set for me. So I really like that. And part of the Afterburner training and part of what we do at Afterburner is we help people to do that, to be able to think decisively and to take action and to be accountable to the actions that they take. But you don't do that without planning and briefing and executing with flawless execution.
Love it. Amazing audience. Again, you're hearing it live here from Rob Brus. I like the bros part for some reason, but again, it's Rob Brus. Yeah, Rob, let's switch gears for a moment. Let me invite you now into my time machine that is surrounded with beautiful, warm, blue Caribbean water. Rob, what is your earliest childhood memory?
I've actually, believe it or not, I've had to think about this recently. My daughter gave me a present for Christmas, and, it says, the cover of the book, it was a book, and it says, in this book, I'm going to ask you a whole lot of questions, Dad, and it's about your childhood and getting to know you. And I opened it, and funny enough, the first page that I flicked to was that very question. What's your earliest memory of childhood? And I really had to think about it because, I don't know, I'm having a bit of a hard time remembering last week, never mind my earliest memory. And after a couple of days and sifting through that, where I arrived was, believe it or not, in Sydney here in Australia, there used to be an airport, and maybe for some of the older Australian listeners, you might remember this place. It was called Schofields Airport. It was in Western Sydney. And my earliest memory is my mum and dad taking me to Schofields Air Show. And at the time, the Royal Australian Air Force, funny enough, the first memory I have is of a military jet. There was an F111 strike bomber that flew down from Queensland, and it flew a display down there. And my first recollection and my very earliest memory was of that particular event. And I mustn't have been more than about 5 years old. I must have been 4 or 5 years old, I think. But it's kind of a cool memory to have because later in life, when I joined the Navy, those same F111s used to come out on maritime strike missions with us, and I used to go up against those guys, controlling those guys all the time. They were good guys. They were adversaries as well at the same time, and I got very, very fond memories of that.
Why do you think the memory was buried? Why do you think it was so challenging to pull it up?
I guess it's not something that you think about very much. And there's, in that little book that my daughter gave to me, there's so many little challenging questions like that. And, you know, that I guess that memory stood out because if you've ever been to an air show before, a fighter jet is a pretty loud thing. And when they're low and they're fast, it's like, wow, you know, there's really nothing else like that. And I'm certain that many of your listeners have experienced something like that before. And that's probably the reason that is the earliest memory, not because it was something to do with the Air Force or planes or something like that. I think it was just because it was so loud and low and it's just stuck in my mind. Why it was buried so deep, I couldn't say. Okay. I don't know. It's one of those things.
If we fast forward to when you were 12 years old, what was your favorite song?
Gosh, when I saw that question in the pre-interview questionnaire, I had to giggle. I think the very first time, my brother is 5 years older than me, right? And my brother was into heavy metal back in the late 80s, early 90s, I suppose it was. And he used to bring all these Metallica CDs home. Back in the day, it was tapes. It was Metallica. It was Motley Crue. It was Slayer back in those days. It was old school metal. And funny enough, I think my earliest memory and the first song that I remember was a Motley Crue song.
What song?
And believe it or not, so Motley Crue, the song was "Girls, Girls, Girls," and I remember the album cover was a picture of the band in front of these motorbikes with these cheesy 1980s haircuts and this cheesy 1980s photo and this like completely politically incorrect song these days. But you know what? That is the answer to the question. That's the earliest recollection.
It's such a privilege to immortalize these memories.
It's fun, right? It's super fun.
It's definitely fun. All right, my friend. Well, we've arrived at our destination, but before we get off of this time machine, there's a small declaration form. So it's yes or no. We're going to move pretty quickly here. Are you ready?
Send it.
Rob, have you chosen someone to pass on your skills to?
Yeah, absolutely. I have, definitely.
Are you married?
No.
Do you have children?
3.
Do you believe in God?
No.
Do you have an inner circle of friends?
Definitely.
Do you watch TV for more than 3 hours a day?
No way.
How about 3 hours a week?
Yeah, probably 3 hours a week, yeah.
What about screen time, the phone and or the computer? Is it more than 8 or less than 8 hours a day?
It would be more than 8 hours a day.
Rob, if you had to share with us your own unique real statement, a statement that represents who you are, Rob Brus, what would you say that is?
That's the easiest question of the whole interview, mate. I would say, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever you're working on, get busy, get to it, and go all in.
Love it, Rob Brus. Again, great pleasure. Before you leave, is there anything else you'd like to share with our amazing audience?
Yeah, sure. Why don't you pop on over to my website and you can have a listen to my podcast as well. It's goallin.com.au.
goallin.com.au. Rob Brus, again, thank you for being on what is inspired by 12-Minute Convos with Angel Jones.
Thanks, Angel. Great to talk to you, mate. See you soon, mate.
Same here.
This segment has been brought to you by Amazel Enterprise.